Thanks for downloading this episode of the Resilient Advisor Podcast. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me for this interview is Elizabeth McCourt. Elizabeth is a leadership expert who runs the McCourt Leadership Group. She has spoken at TEDx conferences, authored a recently released novel, and provides leadership coaching with a specialization in financial advisors, which makes her a natural fit for this audience. Thanks for coming on the show, Elizabeth.
Hey, Jay. Thank you so much for having me on.
So the role of a financial advisor has changed dramatically over the last decade. And as the role has evolved, it is clear that despite all the training programs that are offered, there's not a lot of resources to help advisors become better leaders. And this is one of your specialties. Let's get right into it. How can financial advisors become better leaders?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways. The first way is actually to want to become a better leader, because if we're not aware of what we are and aren't doing, I think that's a number one fail. And you and I, we see this in the industry all the time. You're doing it a certain way and you've had success and financial success, but is your team functioning at the highest level, and are they happy so that you can be productive on many levels? Because I think a great team and great support leads to more business.
So they have to want to be a leader, take some action, do some research, maybe get some training first.
I think so. I think the first thing is to really be self-aware of who you are and the impact you're having on others. I think one of the issues I see often that's it's potentially a blind spot to a lot of high-performing individuals, particularly in finance, is that people are intimidated by you.
Yes. And
I think, right? And so I think that is one of those things that maybe maybe you like a little bit, but is that the most effective way to interact with people? Does that allow you to, both with your clients and the people you work with, to get under a layer and find out what's going on so that you can have maximum success in that department? So I think that's one of those things. Are you self-aware enough? Do you know what kind of impact you're having on others? And are people intimidated by you?
I can tell you from consulting engagements, I'll, be working with the lead advisor. They feel that they are, inclusive and engaged with their whole team. And then when I work with the support staff individually, they'll share, once there's a level of comfort, their level of intimidation, and that the lead advisor or advisors, they never fully recognize it. How can an advisor become more conscious of that?
There's a couple ways. I know you had Nicole Jansen on, and she talked about the DISC assessment. I also do a leadership assessment. That's certainly, there's many of them out there. That's one way to do it. The other way is also, I've done this for people. You hire a coach, and not only would I coach and speak with the advisor, but I would also get permission to talk to the team. And like you said, there has to be a level of comfort and a level of buy-in. But I think that you don't know what you don't know unless you ask. So who can you ask that will really give you a true and honest assessment? So I think additionally, a third thing that you could do is ask a few people that you trust to give you an honest opinion of how you're coming across.
Okay. Excellent advice. So what else? What's the second thing advisors could do to start building their leadership skills?
I think another thing that is essential for all leaders is to have, sort of goes hand in hand with this intimidation factor, but to have a little bit of vulnerability and to show a little bit more of, I call it a holistic approach to leadership, because who you are as a person and at home, you can't completely separate that from who you are in the office. I know we like to say that, we completely separate these things. But showing a little part of yourself, whatever it is it your family? Is it a sport? Is it, something that's appropriately personal? Being able to share certain things makes people trust you and makes them want to engage with you a little more. So it's showing a little bit of vulnerability there And it helps with the intimidation factor, and it also helps with trust as well. So I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind.
And does humility fit into that?
I think so. I think that's really important.
That's real hard. That's really difficult for some financial advisors.
It is really hard because, I mean, as you know, you're performing at a high level, you have a brand, you have an image that you're promoting, but people like to see a little bit of imperfection and honesty. I think so. Maybe it's more about being honest and being real. That's a lot of what I work on with people is how do you stop the BS and get real with who you are so that you can really engage in a deeper connection, a deeper personal dynamic with the people that not only that you are your clients, but the people that you're working with.
Okay, excellent. What else could advisors do to help with their leadership?
Well, I think, one of the fun things is we don't like to fail, and we don't like to say we're not doing well at something. And if you're sort of putting the stops on failure, you're actually crushing innovation. So something that, like you said, there's been a lot of change in the industry. So things that worked 10 years ago are no longer things that are working now. So there's an opportunity, obviously within the bounds of compliance. There are opportunities to maybe do things a little bit differently and maybe get engagement from the younger members of your team, perhaps even millennials who are really engaged in technology and things like that, to really find out maybe what can we be doing a little bit differently that we haven't done in the past that can make an impact. So I think, for example, something like if you always send birthday cards, you always do this, you always do that, why not do something different? What would be, I encourage people to think, like, what would you want to get from someone? What kind of input, present, anything, sort of like a special event, something a little bit different. Like the same old humdrum is just not working for people anymore. So try and do something a little bit different and know that not everything will work out, and that's okay. That's how you inspire innovation and creativity, is to give yourself the opportunity to fail a little bit. Doesn't mean you're losing the whole shebang, but just to inspire that.
I'm probably a little more blunt about this. I mean, you have to fail. It's the only way you can be successful. And we have a whole generation of financial advisors that have, come up during this, bull market that maybe hasn't made a whole lot of sense to some folks, but they have not had to go out and prospect. They have not had to go out and receive the type of rejection or failure that's needed to build a thriving practice. And boy, they're really going to be in a bad spot when the market does turn, when it's not quite so easy to onboard those new clients. So what you're saying is leaders should encourage that type of failure so that it can then in turn obviously lead to success.
Exactly. I mean, have that brainstorming session. Google is one of those very cool companies that has like a celebration party for failure. Like give your, it's also about intimidation, inviting conversation. All these things are linked together. Have a brainstorm and let nothing be a bad answer. Doesn't mean you're going to do all of those things, but pick a few out of the box opportunities. It also goes along with, I always say you've got to be able to pivot, and you're talking exactly about this. There's changes in the market, there's changes in the work environment, there's changes in compliance and DOL and all these things. And so you cannot do things the same. It's just not going to be as effective as it once was.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about pivoting. How can advisors use pivoting to enhance their leadership skills and their, leadership presence on the team?
Well, one of the things I like to talk about, we talk about the aging advisor population, and we're not able to get younger people and women in the business. It's very, very difficult. But how can you maybe go out in your community and do some mentorship and get some reverse mentorship? So it's sort of tit for tat. Who can you help? If it's not on your team, maybe out in your community, which is also a good way to generate business. But how can you, get some input from a younger generation to inspire that pivot, inspire doing something different? I mean, I had an advisor once, they hired a younger employee, and the younger employee said, gosh, he's doing so much. He's so successful. He's such a reputation, and he's not utilizing his reputation in the area. And so I asked this, like, well, what would you suggest? And to really encourage that. So to really go in and say, what could I do that's different? What would you like? And expand your reach. And that's part of the change, the failure, the lack of intimidation, the pivot. They're all really linked together to help you really expand and enhance your business and make it fun again. I mean, isn't that the point too, to really enjoy what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, this business is way too hard to not be financially rewarded and have a little bit of fun.
Absolutely. I mean, it's any business, right? We've got to, I always say, if it's not fun, sometimes it's a job. I mean, sometimes work is work, but ultimately you should have a passion for the work you're doing and also wanting to make a positive impact both in your current environment and on the people that you're dealing with.
Okay, excellent. So anything else advisors could do to help establish leadership?
I think I like to say there's a difference in like how you show up, because there's performance, there's being the highest producer in the office and one of the, the top of your game. And then there's presence, how you emanate, how you interact and you emanate like your presence. I mean, when you see a speaker and you go, wow, what a presence that person has, which is very different from the content of the conversation. So to really take an honest look was what kind of, not only your performance, but how are people viewing you and what kind of person, advisor, leader do you want to be? And maybe that's part, there's work involved. Maybe it's part aspirational of getting inspiration from a leader. It could be out of the industry, of course, that you admire certain qualities and think about how you might work to obtain and get more of those qualities into your own leadership. And that's more about the presence, which ultimately will lead to performance.
Excellent. Elizabeth, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, sharing your thoughts on how advisors can establish some leadership on their team. How could listeners get in touch with you?
A few ways. My website is McCourtLeadership.com, and I do coaching and consulting. I do still recruit with a new partnership that I'm excited about with Victoria Chris. So you can find me there. But my email is Elizabeth@McCourt Leadership. That's probably the easiest. And I love to tweet and engage with people about leadership. And you can find me on Twitter at EC_Court. That's my Twitter handle. It's pretty easy. It's Elizabeth and then C for car and then McCourt.
Excellent. I will have links to all of that in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jay. It was really fun.